So thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm absolutely delighted to have you here. I want to talk a moment about what inspired the theme for this year's series, Defining America. I think we all can see how deeply divided our society has become of late. You can see it in the coverage of stories like immigration, taxes, elections, terrorism, race, civil rights, and even education. It's hard to say whether these risks have always existed this deeply or if they have become worsened by today's events, politically specifically. But I'm distressed by our inability to have civil conversations about difference. We seem to have lost even the ability to decide on a common set of facts upon which we would base these conversations. And it's been these conditions and the extremely polarizing rhetoric about what represents America that inspired me to craft this series around the questions of Americanness and American ideals. One of the central narratives of the American dream has always been access to opportunity. And one of the ideas that I think Americans have long held is the belief that the United States is a place where opportunity is not just based exclusively on wealth or family position or some inherited status. The United States has long been a land where many people without those benefits have also been successful. And one of the realities of the late 20th and 21st centuries has been that the opportunity has come to depend even more heavily on higher education. That education has become increasingly more expensive and frequently out of reach for many communities. At the same historical moment, some other dynamics have evolved. There have been challenges to the traditional notions of who belongs in America. We have all heard the rhetoric and tragically seen some of its worst and how it has morphed into violence across our country. The examples of hatred that have emerged over the past year have been striking in their unapologetic hostility toward people of color and people born outside of the United States. So you may be thinking, how do these realities connect to discussions about higher education? For me, I see how they could not be. We've been thinking about this a long time, about higher education, and is it really a public good that benefits us all? But it is financed largely by private funds, which obviously puts many people at a disadvantage. This evening, we're going to take some time to talk about that. Does that make sense? The free community college movement that picked up steam under President Obama would suggest a possibility. But to scale it up across the country might require that we create new ways of thinking about education and opportunity. And it might call for some new strategies to successfully close the persistent achievement gap. And I look forward tonight to exploring these questions and engaging the president of Trinity University, Pat McGuire, my friend and colleague, and dare I say even mentor. But first, I'd like to introduce Steve Hull, editor and publisher of the Bethesda magazine and Bethesda Beat. Both are very popular in our circles, and we're so pleased that Bethesda magazine and Bethesda Beat is a media sponsor for this event. Steve, would you like to come and say a few words?
Thank you, Darian, and good evening, everyone. I'm in a position I vowed I'd never want to put myself in as a speaker, and that's following Dr. Pollard at the lectern. Not a good place to be. Bethesda Magazine and Bethesda Beat are pleased to be the media sponsors of the Defining America series put on by Montgomery College. This series is an example of something that is all too rare in today's hyper-partisan political environment, an opportunity for concerned citizens to come together to have informed and civilized discussions about the underlying challenges we face as a country and as a democracy. As the editor and publisher of Bethesda Magazine and Bethesda Beat, I am all too aware that not everyone in Montgomery County lifts the level of discourse One only needs to check some of the comments on our website to know that that's the case. But in general, we are fortunate to live in a community where serious conversations about important issues are welcomed and even embraced. And we're especially fortunate to have a leader like Dr. Pollard who is willing to convene and lead these discussions. Dr. Pollard has been president of Montgomery College since 2010. During her tenure, she has positioned the college to meet the needs of the county's rapidly changing population, working with Montgomery County Public Schools, with the universities at Shady Grove, and others. She has led efforts to create educational pathways for every student. Achieving Collegiate Excellence and Success, ACES, a support program she championed that helps students transition from high school to college completion, is just one example of Dr. Pollard's influence and impact. Named by that other magazine in Washington as one of Washington's 100 most influential women, Dr. Pollard is both an educational leader nationally and a community leader here at home. It's my pleasure to welcome President Pollard back to the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So I have the distinct pleasure of introducing my friend and colleague that we're going to be listening to and learning from. I happen to know some people in the room specifically said, I'm coming to hear Pat tonight because we are such huge fans of both her mission, but also the way in which she chooses to do the work. So let me tell you a little bit about her formally before we move into a set of questions. Pat McGuire has been the president of Trinity since 1989. And before coming to Trinity, Ms. McGuire was the Assistant Dean for Development and External Affairs for Georgetown University Law Center, where she was also an adjunct professor of law. Earlier, she was project director for Georgetown's DC Street Law Project, and she was also a legal affairs commentator for the award-winning CBS Children's News magazine, 30 Minutes, and the Fox television program, Panorama in Washington. That is a diverse set of experiences, which I think is absolutely says so much about who you are. President McGuire earned her Bachelor of Arts degree, cum laude, from Trinity College and her law degree from Georgetown University Law Center. She is currently a member of the boards of directors of the Greater Washington Board of Trade and the Washington Metropolitan Consortium of Universities. She also serves on the boards of the DC College Success Foundation, the Morris and Gwendolyn Cafris Foundation, that should sound pretty familiar to us, the Catholic Charities of DC, United Educators, and the Emeritus Mutual Holding Company. Now, I have a list of about a dozen other boards that she serves on, and I won't read them all, but what I will tell you is these suggest to me that Pat McGuire does not consider education to be best served in isolation. She reaches out to hospitals, charitable foundations, and workforce development entities, among others, and her perspective on leadership, I suspect, informs her participation on all of these groups. It's probably one of the reasons that Secretary Arne Duncan appointed her to the U.S. Department of Education's Advisory Committee on Student Financial Aid in 2014, and she was also appointed in 2000 by D.C. Mayor Anthony Williams and the D.C. Financial Control Board to a special term on the Education Advisory Committee overseeing the D.C. public schools. And she's received honorary degrees from 8 universities, has been awarded a Carnegie Award for academic leadership, and was named by that other magazine's 100 Most Powerful Women repeatedly. She's been honored widely by esteemed organizations for her leadership in creating access to higher education for low-income students. Please join me in welcoming Patricia McGuire.
Thank you, Dr.
You're
Pollard.
welcome.
Thank you so much.
So I'm so excited. I so admire the work that you do and how you choose to do that. Your efforts at building partnerships have been a model, I think, about how higher education should work. Your commitment to excellence, but also to community is significant, and economic mobility, which is oftentimes left out of the conversation. And I want to frame these conversations about America and Americanness with a few things. I'm going to start off with the question that I posed to you in the hallway that's a little different than the original list we talked about, but I think it informs how you're going to probably answer the rest of these questions. So those of you who don't follow, if you're on Twitter, you need to follow Patricia McGuire because she represents, I think, a type of higher education president that I dare say is missing right now. And one of the critiques that she and I have often, was just lamenting, is that in some spaces in the history, we were seen as college or university presidents as these truth tellers, these people who represented the ability to be community leaders and assets, to challenge and raise up and lift up challenging perspectives, to demonstrate how one thinks about them with intellectual rigor, but compassion and mission focus. And I dare say that in some cases that doesn't exist anymore, or they're far and few in between. And I have some theories about it, but I'd love to maybe open with this question. What's the role right now of a college university president in this environment in which we're operating now, and around this question of Americanness?
Well, listen, this just opens the entire door. And I want to say thank you to my good friend, Dr. Pollard, and also to note that she is one of the great presidents, as I want to say at the outset, recognized with your own Carnegie Award, so we can compare notes on that. I have a little plaque on my wall that says, "Well-behaved women don't make history." And it's something we recite all of the time, and I live by that credo, if you will. And it relates to what I feel about this question you just raised, which I've talked about on many occasions, and I've even taken some of my brother and sister presidents to task on this. I think many college presidents are entirely too corporate and too tied into almost a conspiracy of silence about some of the great issues in our civilization, in our country today. And why is this? I ask myself this all the time. And first, in order to care about the question even, you have to understand where some of us come from in terms of our own understanding of our roles and responsibilities. My parents didn't go to college. My mother was daughter of Italian immigrants. My father was son of Irish immigrants. Neither of them knew their parents really. They were raised by aunts and uncles. I never met my grandparents. And so there's this stereotype of the Ozzie and Harriet family. But in fact, when I went to college, I was the first in my generation, first in my family to go to college. And that always stuck with me. And they sacrificed a lot to be sure that I and my brothers could go to college. We didn't have a lot of money. We had scholarships and so forth. So that made an impression on me about the importance of going to college. And they were very adamant that we should go, even though they had not gone. So all stories start personally, and I had that piece of personal history. As I moved through college and enjoyed learning, for learning's sake, Trinity back in the day still is and was then a good liberal arts college where you studied Shakespeare and Aristotle because you should. And the sisters made sure that we knew we should. And in fact, it changed my life completely. It was life-changing for me. And I suddenly began to develop this lifelong philosophy of the importance of the power of higher education to change a human life, to actually alter the way you think, the way you understand the problems of life, the way you encounter life, and develop coping skills to deal with life. Now, all of that is backdrop to my philosophy as a college president. Once I began to think about education as this deeply transformative experience, and as I moved through my own professional career, I began to realize that many people were not allowed to have this deeply transformative experience, that there were barriers to access. In my own case, I didn't experience barriers, but for the fact that my parents really wanted me to go to college and I got a scholarship. I might have been one of those kids who didn't go, but I had that privilege, and it was a privileged position to go. I began to look around and realize over time that many, many thousands of people did not have the opportunity to have that same experience. So that's one piece. The related piece is, I also, as I was in college and then went to law school and moving on, began to develop a realization that it was voices from the colleges and universities that had to act as the counterweight to government.
Yes.
And so not only were we pathways for access for the citizens and for the people, but we also had a function to hold government accountable and to speak truth to power. So those two threads tying together. And all of a sudden, one day, lo and behold, I woke up and became a college president. I didn't set out to become a college president.
Funny how that happens.
I was a street lawyer. And as I developed my pathway early on in the presidency, I said to myself, this is an opportunity to make access to the life-changing experience of higher ed happen for the many, many, many women. We're still primarily a women's college at Trinity. For the many women in Washington, in the District of Columbia, and in our region who did not have access to higher education, because this is a life-transforming experience. Yes, it's a pathway to a good job, but it's a life-transforming experience. And two, we have to use the beautiful power of this bully pulpit to call our nation and our government to truth, to action for those who need it, and to building a future of the good society. I'm a big believer in the good society, that communitarian ideal, to justice, to the preservation of freedom. And finally, I'll just say about this, I believe all of that deeply in my own philosophy, and I, in recent years, have been shocked and saddened that often I feel like a lonely voice, one or two others, yours, a few others like you, like me, out there. But for the most part, it's a great plateau of silence from our college presidents. And we need to address that as presidents with our brethren.
One of my theories around this is that the pressures, political, cultural, of media, social media, have made some of our colleagues so conservative and fearful, others are just complacent and content, that they don't recognize this idea that the public good of education, the private good of education, and as a result of that, they have simply focused on what I need to do to get my college from this day to the next day to the next day to the next day. And this idea that you talk about of the good society, this role that we all play in that, I think should figure more prominently. Can you talk to me a little bit about this idea and how you see that self-manifest right now in higher ed?
Yeah, I see this manifest a lot. And I was with a presidential colleague recently. We were chatting about something, and he said, you know, I see what you say on Twitter. I couldn't possibly say what you say on Twitter. And I said, well, why can't you do that? He said, well, after the travel ban, you know, early in this year, after the travel ban, I put out a message to my community that was very mild, but that said, you know, the travel ban is wrong, and we have students who are harmed by this, and the president shouldn't have done this. And he said, I got slapped down by my board chair. My board chair called me up and said, you must not make political statements like that. Now, this brother president was not in a big public university where sometimes that does happen because of the legislature. This was a private college president. And I looked at him and I said, so you let your board chair get away with that? And he said, well, he was the board chair. And I said, well, that's one voice among many, you know, and sometimes you have to speak truth to the power of your board chair. That's one person. The board chair is not your boss per se. The board is your boss collectively. But we have a very serious problem of presidents who are scared to say the right thing and to be leaders. Now, I'm not scared. Maybe it's because I've been president for so long, I can't even remember. You know, I've been president so long, most of my students were born after I became president. So, and, you know, at this point, the people who don't like what I do are used to me and they know I won't change. But I believe it is the responsibility of the university president to be a role model for freedom of speech, okay? And I have had presidents say to me, well, if you say that out loud, then maybe you're chilling other people's speech if you say what you think. And I disagree with that very much. I say, no, no, no. If the president is afraid to speak, who else can speak? If the president doesn't model the freedom responsibly exercised, then you're not showing students how to do it at all. You're not provoking your faculty to rise up and perhaps disagree. You should provoke your faculty to disagree. It would be a good thing to have some disagreements around this. But to just allow this culture of silence to go on, what are we about if we're not about the truth? Seriously. The rest of it is important, but the truth is central.
Ooh, there's a whole lot of great lines out of this woman over here. And I want to go back to the song you talked about, fear.
Yeah.
Because I think fear has become so paralyzing for so many of us right now. And this idea that I think a lot of us are fearful to talk about the consequences of a lack of higher education for our students that we serve.
Right.
Special populations that we might have at Trinity and at Montgomery College. How do you start to talk about the power and agency of higher education and as it relates to the American dream? Because there's a direct correlation, but I don't think other people oftentimes see it.
Well, I'm going to tell a little story on Trinity and myself, and I've told the story in public before, and some people are shocked when I say it, but it's about naming what it is that people are afraid of. So when I started as Trinity's president in 1989, and I was allowed to be president because nothing else bad could happen at that time. I was the sixth person in 8 years. The sisters had been presidents. They couldn't do it. There weren't any more sisters. There was the first lay president was an experienced male college president who lasted a very short period of time. And I came in, I had no experience at all in management, which was a good thing. I didn't know what to be afraid of. So I didn't have fear. I had brashness of youth. I asked the admissions, we had 300 full-time undergraduates at that time. And I asked the admissions director how many students we were recruiting from the DC public schools. And she said, none. And I said, what do you mean, none? She said, oh, well, they can't do the work here. The great they. Trinity was a great historic institution that was dying of the weight of its own institutionalized racism, its fear of the city. There were people who wanted us to sell our campus in Northeast DC and move to the suburbs to be safe. And we totally missed what our mission was and our ministry. And it was the sisters, who were fewer in number, but on the board still, who stood up in a board meeting one day and said, why are we trying so hard to reclaim a population that's gone when there are thousands of women at our doorstep who need us? We founded Trinity to make a higher education accessible to women who couldn't go to college in 1897. And back then it was upper class white women, Catholics, who were the predominant group who Trinity was serving then. And the nuns were saying, but today, thousands of women in Washington aren't going to college, not because they can't be admitted, but for many other barriers. And those women are different from our historic population, but they are the population we are called to serve. I totally agreed with them. Our alumni went nuts because the issue of race in American society, as we see today, to this very minute, and certainly throughout the period of time we changed Trinity's demographics, it was white hot. So I would go out to visit with alumni as our population. We had been 95% white, mostly Irish Catholics. And suddenly our population began to change. And first it was 70-30, and then it was 40-40, and then it was 60-40 in the opposite direction. And the alums were getting angrier and angrier, and it was a very public fight. And I would go to meetings, and I would have some of our lovely ladies, and certainly having a hard time understanding. I actually would have some alums come up to me and say, when did you stop accepting white students at Trinity? I mean, these stories have been told. It sounds shocking to some. Why are all of those students here? And a lot of this language. I remember being at an alumni luncheon in Florida at one of the great golf courses, and the same woman stood up every year and asked me the same question, so I thought I was ready for it. And she stood up and said in this one year, well, you know, we don't mind diversity, but what are their SAT scores? And she asked this all the time. And at that moment, I kind of lost it. And I decided to tell the truth, and I looked at her and I said, you know something, Roseanne? I don't know and I don't care, because we are making an opportunity to become a successful human being happen for each and every one of the students we admit to Trinity. And we are setting these lives on a course of academic, personal, professional, spiritual success that but for our welcome of these young women, they would not have had. There was dead silence in the room. I thought, uh-oh, okay, I guess I'm a goner. And then they all stood up and applauded. And they were so happy that I had finally confronted the opposition, who I later realized was small, but I was terrified. I was terrified to say the truth about what was happening at Trinity, because the issue of the racial composition of our student body was so stressful and so contentious. So I had to learn to speak about the truth. I had to learn to confront the naysayers, and we had to learn as an institution, a historically white Catholic institution that is now officially classified as a predominantly black institution, we had to learn how to talk about race out loud and proudly and with conviction. And that, having gone through that experience and having known the fear and the effort to dissemble and all of that, and then realizing, forget about that, we became an institution known for welcome. We have now welcomed a population of dreamers on campus, so we're out in front on the dreamer issues. We have over 100 dreamers. Half of our students come from the District of Columbia now, mostly from the public and charter schools in the city. We're so proud to have a partnership with Montgomery College and hope to keep expanding that. But all of this is about saying out loud, my students from Anacostia and Prince George's County and Montgomery County, who populate Trinity today, have as much of a right to be in college as any of the prior generations. And what they want is the same thing. They don't want something different from what the ladies at the Naples Golf Club wanted back when they went to college. They want the same thing. They want the life-transforming experience. And by the way, the skills necessary to get good jobs, too. I hope that's not too much.
Oh, no, you just spoke to my spirit there, because I think there's so many parts of what you said, this idea that, and maybe I'll pose it as a question so I can learn some more from you in this. How do we, on college campuses then, start to create spaces and places where we can talk about issues of race and class and poverty and difference and all the things that we seemingly have forgotten how to talk about in our society right now? What are our obligations? I mean, you've kind of talked about obligations, but how do we do that? Because I think sometimes we're so worried about, you know, the alumni calling up and saying they don't like this, a legislator saying that you didn't do that, or a neighbor saying, hey, you're taking my tax money, what are you doing here? All the different things that figure
We've got all of those.
figure into that conversation. But yet and still, we have the responsibility of creating life-transforming experiences for the students who come here. And at Montgomery College, we're talking about 60,000 of them each year. How do we do that?
Well, this is a very interesting and provocative problem for American higher education right now in this moment, in the current political environment, with all of the issues of racism, police brutality, you know, the national anthem and NFL thing, which is all about the protester, about racism and police brutality, but the people who are manipulating the rhetoric want to make it about something else and deflect. We see this happening on college campuses, where suddenly all the talk this year is about, can you have these right-wing conservatives come talk? Right. Nobody's talking about, can you have people come talk about racism and the rights of people who are being trampled on right now. That seems to be a beside-the-point issue, and we're spending too much time talking about defending things that are defenseless, in my view. But, I mean, they have a right to speak, but it's not what we should be talking about. I think there is no time like the present for college presidents to reclaim the voice that has been too long silent. And I think that presidents have to give voice to these issues so that everyone else feels comfortable and called to speak about the issues too on campus. So we have to talk about what's happening in this country right now about race and racism. And here's how it translates to higher education in a very pointed way. You know, everybody was fine with higher education being this pathway to intellectual and spiritual growth and to learning Shakespeare and Aristotle and the great liberal arts canon, until suddenly a whole lot of Black and Hispanic students started coming into higher education. Then everybody starts talking about workforce development. And it just makes me so angry because, yes, my students need jobs, so do yours, but my students have as much right to quote Hamlet as anybody who came before them. And this idea that higher education suddenly has to be turned into a job training factory, and that maybe we don't need degrees, maybe we just need badges, and that, you know, maybe we need credentials, and, you know, that's all lovely, but that's not higher learning. That is something different. It's something that we do, and nobody minds that we do it. I certainly do it. You do it gloriously here. But we cannot forget, I'll go back to what I originally said, higher education is supposed to change the person. And the person is supposed to become empowered to be able to be a better citizen, a better leader, a better parent, to be able to participate in changing society for the better. And this movement, having come along at a time when issues of race, issues of ethnicity, because that's what's going on in the border wall fights, is about race and ethnicity also. You know, let's be clear, nobody's talking about building a wall across Canada. It's only across Mexico. Let's just be very clear about that. We know what that's all about. So the idea that we would deny new generations that ultimately are going to be majority non-white the same kind of beautiful higher education that previous generations had, and instead just turn them all into workers, is a betrayal of our business. And if presidents don't feel strongly about that and name it for what it is profoundly a racial disorder in this society that we need to talk about.
So I heard a quote one time that said that higher education was a movement before it was a set of buildings to be managed.
Absolutely.
And that has always resonated with me. And as I hear you talk about this, and I think about this movement that many of us are also talking about, achievement gaps, opportunity gap, whatever the parlance is of that particular moment. Why do you think, and this is obviously a nuanced question, but why do you think the achievement gap still exists in higher education? And then what should we be doing about it in order to give our students, all of them, access to what this movement of higher education was? Not just furniture of the mind, as Edie Hirsch said, but this also, this idea that it's about, you said it so many times, transformative. Self-transforming types of movements. How do we do that?
Well, you have to do it. So first of all, the opportunity gap is something that starts at birth practically, and we know that. And it is an artifact of centuries of racial disparity and economic disparity that tracks racism. I mean, poverty and race do go hand in hand in our country, and efforts to say, well, they're not related, or it's, the fashionable lingo in higher ed is not to talk about African-American students or Latina students, but to talk about low-income students, and that is just such a euphemism. And yes, white students can be low-income too, but the majority are, in fact, students of color. But the problem really starts in the lower grades in K-12 education, and you have to acknowledge that. And the problem from there really starts with parental education levels. So here's the deal, and you do this so beautifully here at Montgomery College. We try to do a little bit of it at Trinity in our adult education programs. We need colleges and universities to realize that education is not just for the higher degree, but education needs to be a family enterprise. And we need to work with our school systems to get those moms and dads out there better educated, because if a parent reads to a child, the child is far more likely to be a better student and to become a college graduate. We know all of this. Right. And we know that one of the plagues of impoverished areas and marginalized areas is that the parents do not have the literacy skills they need to participate in their child's education. That's number one. Number two, we have to, and you're in this business here, and I'm a little bit in this business, we have to convince all of the people who write opinions about higher education that people do not go through college today the way 18-year-olds went through it in 1950.
Right.
Okay? In fact, the majority of students in college today have non-traditional characteristics. 75%, I think, according to the Department of Ed, have at least one or more non-traditional characteristics. In fact, the word non-traditional is wrong. They are post-traditional. And the fact is that nearly half are students who are older than age 23. 25% have children of undergraduates. A large percentage of students are working full-time while in college, whether full or part-time. And therefore, they are not going to go through college and complete on a traditional timetable that is still held out as the standard. And therefore, if you use the old measures for new students, you've got all of this bad rhetoric about completion rates and all this other stuff that doesn't matter to a hill of beans difference. And I've heard people at the Department of Ed say, yes, we know that all the data is flawed, but it's the only data we got, so we're going to use it. It undermines our ability to do the kind of educational work that you and I are doing, to be able to educate the parents who come to us, maybe first come to us in associate degree programs, maybe come in post-secondary programs. It undermines our ability to incentivize students who start college but are on the 10-year plan to finish in a timely way. And if those moms don't finish, then they're not going to feel good about reading to their kids. And this is the cycle, that so long as we treat the idea of finishing college as the only success measure, and instead we're not treating the idea of learning along the way as part of the success measure, we disincentivize people, and the majority of students at some point stop out. We know this. You know, the majority of students transfer, and they're treated as dropouts in the federal system. But there's this other huge, there's something like 35, 40 million Americans who started college and never finished.
Yes.
And, you know, the pundits love to call them college dropouts. They're not dropouts. They are people who have learned, and they need to be incentivized to come back and to continue to working on those degrees. But the system is wrong, the measurements are wrong, and the measurements work particularly against students of color and low-income students, who are largely students of color.
So there are, though, in this time that we live in, and particularly given the political environment that we're in right now, lots of folks who are highly critical of higher education. Yes, you have an important role that you play in our society. Yes, you provide access to higher education, maybe too much access. That you are here to provide a significant value and worth to the community, but you all are these folks in the ivory tower. You know, you're disconnected. You're too busy pacifying students. You're too soft. You're making them all into snowflakes. You don't have conversations that allow for critical discourse, and you don't allow equal opportunity for liberal perspectives, progressive perspectives, and conservative ones. That you are in effect producing the next generation of liberal thinking folks who are going to continue to kill society. You know, you hear, if you listen to enough of these folks on TV, they say that.
You listened to Rush recently? Come on now.
I know. I want to make sure that I stay informed on all the sides.
You need to.
I need to, even if it makes my blood pressure go up.
But
what I try to take away from that conversation, I think they're full of all types of inappropriate attacks. I think there are some critiques that may be offered of higher education, and that we have not done some of the work that we may need to do or should have done. Do you think that there's some?
Well, I think first of all, we have to, you know, keep insisting higher ed is not one industry, it's many industries under a big tent.
Yes.
And there's many different kinds of
Yes.
institutions. I am sure that there are institutions, and I hear about them, and that I may see them on television, for whom, you know, the next football game is the only thing that matters, and that everything else is kind of by the bys. But you and I wouldn't know such institutions.
No, we would not.
I'm sure there's institutions, I was actually reading about one today in some higher ed rag, that, you know, have pretty much banned conservative speakers. Well, shame on them. I mean, seriously, this is not, you know, this is not serious education if you are protecting your students. On the other hand, when I hear this criticism, I want to say, well, sure, you come sit and talk to my students who slept in cars last night because they don't have homes. You come talk to my student who is frantic because she's a DACA student and is the only person in her family with a work permit, and she's supporting mom and dad and siblings and is terrified, not that she'll be deported, but that she'll lose her work permit in all of this mess with the Dreamers. And she's not worried about Richard Stone coming and talking on campus, because that's not going to happen at Trinity probably ever, because we're not big enough to be provocative. She's worried about survival. And when you work with students who are worried about survival, where is their next meal coming from, and why are they in college? They're in college because they want that life transformative experience, and they do want the leverage that they will get when they earn the degree to be able to move into the economy in a much more effective way, and that is important. They're not messing around with ideology. They are trying desperately to change their lives. I read the essays of every student who is enrolled in our freshman class. I read their application essays. And it is stunning to me over 10 or 15 years that I've been reading them. The themes are so common. And our freshmen are about 85% Pell grantees, so they are very low income. Our median family income is about $25,000 a year. That's the median. We have about 25% of our students who self-report $10,000 or below as their family income, and they're self-supporting. I mean, they don't have parents. But they write, and we ask them, why do you want to come to a college like Trinity, this old-fashioned Catholic liberal arts college for women? And they write, I want my children's life to be different from mine. I want to be able to take care of my mom so she doesn't have to work so hard. I know that there is a future that I can build with an education that my children should see and should have. Many of these young ladies, about 30% of our students, have babies when they start college already. And they say having their child was the most important thing that made them serious students, because they want to be good role models for their children. These are not kids who are going out on Thursday night drinking their brains out, and you know. And I believe that your students and my students are actually almost the majority in higher ed, but you don't read about them. You read about all of the the slackers and the kids who are playing. Well, that's one subculture of higher ed, but it's not the mainstream. My students are very serious, and they're very thoughtful, and they will critique everything, whether it's the dining hall food or the latest policy out of 1600 Pennsylvania.
Your comment resonates deeply with me. I had an interesting interaction with one of our local elected officials, and I made a comment about the fact that our students needed a certain amount of money to do the type of work. And he made a comment that, oh, that's just beer money. And I remember pausing because I had to think, now, Darian, how are you going to come back on this? Because you're obviously advocating for your institution, you're talking about the issues here, and then I had to realize, no, this is an education moment. So let's talk about the fact that, no, that is not the case, that a third of my students are on Pell Grant, very similar to you. I talk about the fact the average income, the complexity of their life, the nuanced ways in which they have to make life or death decisions about food, housing, transportation, and tuition is at the bottom of that list oftentimes. But I remember thinking, he's thinking about his experience in college, or what the dominant discourse is, or the narrative is about what it means to go to college. When you're thinking about traditionally aged 18-year-old students who are there because mom and daddy sent them there,
Mom and dad paying the bill.
And they're there, they're fratting and drinking and doing whatever, and by the way, at the end of 4 years, will pick up a degree cum laude from X, Y, or Z. No, that is a very different experience than oftentimes the students that we have. So trying to talk about their narrative and to give it value and import, I think is one of the most significant things that we do as college presidents and people who work within our organizations. I struggle, though, about the realities of what it means to serve a changing population. The college just celebrated our 70th anniversary.
Oh, congratulations. That is great.
It was
70
wonderful.
years.
70
Terrific.
years.
Cheers to you.
Thank you. And in that, I looked at the pictures of the early graduating classes of Montgomery College, and they were quite beautiful young men and women with lovely skirts, sitting women poised with their ankles crossed, and the boys in their Letterman jackets right behind them. And I look at the faces of my students now, and I was so struck by your comment, and I had this down, that I read that 100% of Trinity students receive financial aid, half of them having family incomes of $25,000. And it reminds us about the work of going out and finding resources to support these students. How do you manage all of that? I mean, I'm quite serious that this idea of going out and meeting alums and asking them for money to help support scholarships and help having these students maximize federal and district dollars that they may be, it's a lot. How do you manage that?
Well, it is a lot, and the need is never met. You know, it's impossible. And I was talking to some of your good colleagues earlier about food pantries and the clothing library, which is an idea I'm going to steal. I love that. When you serve students who have been marginalized, whose families have been marginalized, they have so many needs. They don't even know how to go to college, even if you meet those needs, because there's just not a family tradition. And I had a student last year who, first day, I passed her on the corridor, she was weeping, and I took her into my office and I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I didn't know I had to pay for lunch." She had been in free or reduced lunch her whole college, or her whole high school experience, and went over to our dining hall, and you know, the cashier was not friendly to her, and we took care of that pretty quickly. And she got lunch that day, but students just don't know what this world. They go to the bookstore, and my God, there's a $1,000 bill just for looking, you know, at the titles.
Exactly.
So we have had a good deal of success at Trinity, and this is where, on the other side of fear, you find success, okay? So after I walked through all of that confrontation time in the 1990s that was pretty hard at times, then we got to a point where suddenly I realized there were people in this town and in this region who loved what we were doing and wanted to support what we were doing. And some of them were alums, but many were not alums. And they were people who were philanthropists in Washington who saw the need and who saw Trinity stepping up and leaning into the need that the other private universities weren't doing, and frankly still don't do enough of. And we were supplemental to our wonderful public university in DC, and we provide another choice to students who want something different, especially to the girls and the women who want to come. So we've had good luck with private philanthropists approaching us and making extremely generous gifts to support scholarships. We were fortunate that one of the great leaders in Washington, one of the great philanthropists, Don Graham, collaborated first to create the DC Tuition Assistance Grant Program that I think your students also benefit from, and our students do too, and the DC College Access Program. And then we had another great benefactor, Bill Conway, created a huge scholarship program for nursing students. And Don also then created the Dreamer Scholarship. So it went. As we were able to find the resources to support our students, because nobody pays full price. Why should you? You know, I mean, it's just nobody can pay that. For many of our students, coming up with $1,000 is a lot of money, almost too much. Our alumni started realizing that this was a good thing, you know, and it took almost 20 years for our family to get over it was like the stages of grief, the anger, the rejection, the denial, the mourning, and to realize that what we're doing at Trinity today is pretty darn cool, and that it's totally into Catholic social justice for the Catholics in the group,
Right.
and then to start giving again. So we were just able, it's now a year old, to open our beautiful new academic center with nursing labs and science labs. And that campaign was kicked off by a $10 million gift from a woman in the class of 1953.
Wow.
And it's a woman who has her own financial management business. She had been on the other side of the ledger and had given me a hard time for years, and then gradually came to see that what we were doing was exactly the Lord's work and the right thing to be doing. And so she had a change of heart. I've realized you can never give up on donors. You always have to leave the door open for the change of heart. I also believe in the cleansing power of charitable gifts. So in fact, no matter how harsh somebody has been, if they give you a gift, you love them,
That's right.
And so you
best
never
friend.
walk away from the moment, especially when it's on behalf of our students. The other piece of this kind of goes back to some of that nasty thing I was saying about college presidents, but I will say I'm proud of Trinity. We live a pretty Spartan existence at Trinity, and I always say we inherited that from the nuns. So none of us can take a vow of poverty. We all need paychecks. They worked for free. The whole place was built on the free labor of women. We need paychecks, but we live modestly in our faculty and staff culture. We're very frugal. And I told a story once. I was testifying before a congressional committee, and I told the story of we even get down to if somebody wants to order a cookie tray to serve at a faculty meeting, I've been known to ask, well, who paid for those cookies? Some student went into debt for the next 30 years so you can have a chocolate chip cookie, And, well, the members of Congress were so appalled that they were throwing dollar bills at me by the end of this.
A fundraiser.
But it's an allegory, it's not,
Right.
we have cookie trays, but the allegory is that we always ask ourselves, is this thing that we want for ourselves worth spending money on? Or will it unduly burden students? Our new building is all paid for by contributions. It didn't burden student tuition dollars. The same with our sports center that we opened about 15 years ago. It's improved the conditions of life for our students immensely, but we try to do things like that, which is why I can only build one building every generation. But it's through a combination of fundraising, philanthropy, making friends, because the other thing I realized, Trinity was not going to make it if we didn't make friends. And also stretching the dollars very, very far. So we do,
That's an art and a skill.
well, and it requires the people, the team, to be patient with the word no sometimes. That sometimes we just can't do things that everybody else might do in higher ed because it's just not central or important. And the good thing is we don't have a football team, so I don't worry about wasting money on lawyers to get us out of problems or things like that.
Or paying an AD as much as you pay.
And I don't have an AD that makes $7 million and has a Nike contract on the side.
Exactly.
So.
Well, I know that resonated with my chief fiscal officer. She's in the audience, and she's taking us through a lot of work in this space. And so I know you just gained yet another fan listening to that. What I want to do is I want to be mindful. We have about half an hour left in this dialogue, and I have a whole other page of questions.
Okay.
But I want to invite the audience, if there are those of you who have questions or comments that you like to offer or pose to President McGuire, please feel free to do so. There are microphones here and here in the aisle, and I guarantee you, in my experience, it's always the first one that's the hardest. After that, people just seem to come up with a bounty of questions along the way. Well, see, I didn't even have to wait that long.
See that?
Dr. Stewart.
So this is a leadership question. What the heck happened with the presidential leadership at the University of Virginia, where you have white supremacists carrying torches through the middle of campus? Where were the UVA people to meet the white supremacists? I've been thinking about this ever since it happened. They came back to Charlottesville, and nobody confronted them again.
Right.
So you talked a lot about race and how we don't talk about that.
Right.
This scares the daylights out of me.
Well, and it should. And that is a great question. Thank you for asking it. And, you know, I will say among friends here, I mean, I know President Sullivan down there, and she certainly had a hard 5 years with everything that happened to her. She also, you know, has a very tough situation with the legislature and, you know, everything else. Having said that, I think what happened the first time around for the first march is a classic example of risk management gone bad or being absent from school that day. Because, as you know, you cannot allow anything to happen on your campus that you don't know about in advance and ask 1,000 questions about. I disagree that she couldn't have stopped it. I think she could have stopped it had she known. And I disagree with those who say it would have violated freedom of speech principles. You can regulate time, manner, and place. Even on a public university campus, you know that. So you could have stopped them from walking across the grounds in the center of campus. You could have put them somewhere and let them have their little party unto themselves. I also felt, and sad, in a way that was saddened, because I think Terry was a good president. I think she had so many catastrophes to deal with throughout her tenure. And I think it was a sad way for her presidency to end, if you will, because she's a better person than that. I did think the statement that she put out was kind of weak, and I think this is a problem with a lot of statements you see being put out, that they're just kind of, you know, both sides now, let's kumbaya or something, you know, and it's not right. The second march earlier this week, forget about it. They should have shut that right down, and there should have been an extremely immediate and vigorous response to that. That is just shameful, and that was not met with any kind of outrage that I've seen. Perhaps I've missed a statement from the university. And I will compare, I saw something on Twitter coming over here tonight. One of these, I guess it's, is it Richard Stone? Is speaking at Fordham. And the president of Fordham just put out a statement, and it is a very powerful statement saying, well, we're not going to say that he can't speak, but let me tell you why we find him reprehensible. And he sort of went through chapter and verse saying, this does not represent our values, this is wrong, you know, he can speak, and people are free to listen to him, but you need to know what our position is on this. And I felt that coming from a Jesuit president was a pretty good statement when you read it. This is where presidents have to pull out their rhetorical flourishes and be absolutely clear that we will not tolerate these expressions of racism, white supremacy, and so forth. People may express themselves, and you know how we stop it is a management issue, but we can't let the management issue overcome the leadership issue. And we have to express our leadership first and then figure out how to manage it.
Whoa. Because it's interesting that you phrased the question the way you did, Brad, as a leadership question, and then for you to bring it back to that point, because oftentimes we see these as management issues, and they aren't management for all intents and purposes. They really aren't a process issue. They're this clarion call that we want to say about how we choose to lead our organizations and what types of words will we use to talk about that and to put that out there. And that you had me writing down. I'm like, I gotta remember that. Anybody else before I pose? Yeah, please. Dr. Robinson.
Hi. As the changing dynamics of students change, so too should faculty. So do you see the resistance to change and infringement on academic freedom? And how do we begin to have that conversation, as you say, and name it and make that change, and maybe channel that through onboarding or professional development?
That is a great question. Thank you so much. And one, again, that I struggle with even to this very day in certain academic departments, not to be named. I am proud to say that our faculty now is almost half faculty of color, which does not still match our student demographics, but is getting pretty close. But I still have academic departments who are in denial about anything that happened after 1950. They believe that they alone have the right to hire who they will hire, which is not true. And in fact, I have shut down searches, I have refused to hire, and I've sent candidates back when I have felt that the search was insufficiently serious about trying to surface credible candidates of color and candidates that were not of the same ilk as the retiring faculty. I have been fortunate with board support. We created a retirement incentive plan a while ago that has worked really well, and I do believe that faculty turnover can be healthy. I don't mean that in an unpleasant way toward faculty. I just think we all have to realize that at some point we need to make way for new voices and new generations. And so we've been able to create openings that way. I have found it very interesting that as we've moved more into professional studies, especially in healthcare, the healthcare faculty is hugely diverse, and their voices have come into general faculty meetings in a way that I think the liberal arts faculty has found very, very challenging. And that's good also. But I'm still not satisfied. I still find pockets of resistance. The provost and I talk about it practically every day when we see searches coming along and how are we going to deal with this. I had one very unfortunate experience that, again, I don't mind talking about things out loud because you have to name it, where there was one department where there were two equally well-qualified candidates, but the candidate who we decided to hire was African American in a department that had only white faculty members. And a year later, this young woman was fabulous, but she left. And I thought she left, at first I thought she left because she had a better offer, and she did get a better offer, but she later came and spoke to me personally and said the real reason she left was she was frozen out. That her colleagues, claiming seniority, which was really dirty pool, felt that they could just, give her courses and not include her in departmental meetings. And it opened my eyes to some of the dynamics of what goes on in the schoolyard. That this was kind of a mean girls thing going on, that clearly also had such deep roots in racial bias that I don't even know that the faculty members knew what they were doing, except they were having meetings that their colleague was excluded from. And now my antennae are out about that with other departments to see what's really going on. And presidents have to stay on top of that.
We do. It's interesting that oftentimes you can have hiring processes short of the people that directly report to you as a president. Yep. And the assumption is that as a president, you have nothing to do with it. Yeah. And in fact, when you insert yourself in the process, how dare you? Who are you? What, this is, and you have to remind people every now and again, I'm the president. Yeah. And there's a role that I play in the authentic leadership that I think I should be bringing to this work.
And that's where your moral voice comes in on the daily work. And yeah, some faculty don't like it. I'm in a smaller institution, a private institution, so I do get to approve every hire at the end of the day. But they still don't like it. And I mean, early on, it was a huge struggle with faculty. When I started, the faculty were all my professors from when I was a student, so you can imagine. But I had age on my side, so.
Time will do that for you, won't it? Any other questions? And I'll keep, wonderful.
Hi, my name is Mitch Tropin, and it's an incredible pleasure.
Good to see you, Mitch.
I've taught at Trinity over a decade, same thing with Montgomery College, be able to address both my college presidents at once.
There you are.
Yeah. One issue I've noticed, I used to teach at Morgan State, this current administration at the White House is really hostile to education. And it's translating into less money for Pell Grants, less money for the kind of students who go to Trinity and MC. I know MC has been moving forward partnerships. What other means are you pursuing to sort of counter what's happening under this current administration?
Prayer.
And a lot of meditation.
A lot of meditation.
Lot of meditation.
Heavy breathing.
Yeah.
So thank you, Mitch, and it's good to see you here, and you're a good colleague, so thank you. First of all, we cannot give up hope that at the end of the day we can continue to work with Congress to achieve the right results in the Pell Grant program, in the student loan program, and so forth. And you might say, well, why would you have any hope? Well, you know, if you're a president, you got to have hope. The day you come in and you despair is the day you have to resign, because you can't do this work if you're not a hopeful person. We work with all of the associations who work with Congress. I mean, we're private. We work with NICU a lot. We work with ACE and so forth. And I'm ready to go down there, you know, at the drop of a hat and talk to whomever. You know, whether Betsy DeVos and the Department of Education is going to have any higher ed agenda remains to be seen. We haven't heard much from them about the higher ed agenda, except removing anything that started with the Obama administration.
Exactly.
We know that. And that seems to be the main agenda of this administration, is that if Obama had anything to do with it, we kill it, which strikes me as not a good way to leave a legacy, because, you know, what's left? So they've killed Title IX regulations. You know, a lot of colleges had problem with the way, you know, the process issues in the regulations, but the spirit of the regulations was in the right place. And the way they went about just killing it without providing a suitable substitute, you know, is evidence of a lack of seriousness, of purpose about really protecting students and really addressing the problems. I think that we are going to be challenged, whether it is this administration or the next administration. Higher ed always seems to be the favorite whipping post of whatever administration. I mean, frankly, I wasn't all that happy with a lot of what Arne Duncan was doing, you know, and there was an excessive amount of regulation. I also think they've manipulated accreditation to the point where accreditation is now just all about compliance rather than about institutional improvement. And that's another piece of the dilemma that we face. How do we reclaim the idea that accreditation can actually be helpful and not merely painful? So, you know, we're watching all of this. It's one place where I think it's less ideological and it's more the instinct of government to want to try to meddle in educational affairs, because everybody's been to school, so everybody thinks they know how to do it. And we see this, you know, we saw it in the Bush administration, we saw it in the Clinton administration, you know, we saw it in the Obama, and now there actually seems to be less of an agenda with the Trump administration other than to destroy. So I don't know what the proactive piece is going to be yet. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, and I think short of also finding out ways to empower our students, I think for us, and we do a lot of that work as this trinity of trying to help students find their own agency, protect their ability to be informed about the policymakers and what their vote actually means, and then coupling that, I think, with private philanthropy. I think that we're going to have to see more and more of that step into our spaces, because I don't think that the federal government, or even the state government for that matter, will have a lot of capacity or interest in this right now unless it advances their agenda. So this point earlier about us becoming the type of institutions that they want us to see, they will align their dollars that way. So we're going to have to find, I think, other resources to balance what it is that we think we want to do for the students that we serve, who need us now, dare I say, more than ever, to be out there advocating on their behalf so thoughtfully. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think OERs are one of those things that would be leveling for our students. I was so reflective of my own college experience as I listened to Pat talk about that earlier, and one of the ones that I'd never forget, I was the first in my family to go to college. I left the south side of Chicago and went to Ames, Iowa, which I'm still going to write about someday. And I go into this place, and I went there on Pell Grants, student loans, you name it. I was prepared for that first semester until they told me two things. One is that I needed to go buy books. And I went into the bookstore, and this is something new for me, because in high school your books are provided for you. So you walk into a college bookstore and realize, back in 88 through 90, whatever, you're going to pay $500 to $600 for one semester of books. And I remember crying at the checkout counter because I didn't, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm writing this check and praying that it's going to clear so I can get back and go and beg somebody for money at home to send it to me so I can put it in a bank account. The fact that OERs exist right now, I think is so powerful for that. They're a leveler for so many of our students. The other thing that scared me is I thought I had a residence hall, I had a meal plan, but they did not account for Sunday night dinners. So I don't know if they still do that in residence halls, but you would buy a plan for 7 days, it was 20 meals, right? And they just assumed that somebody had some place to go out on a Sunday night. And I didn't have money for that.
No.
So I remember us trying to get things in the middle of the week that would last and put in our little dorm room refrigerators to go and warm up so that we would have, those two things I remember that first semester as if nothing else exists. So there is this idea about how we have to remember what our college experiences are and figure out how to translate that for our students.
Right.
Now, I want to ask you, and anybody else have other questions for President McGuire? Because I have two that I want to end with, and one is maybe a practical one, just simply because it intrigues me. Your leadership style, how does gender influence how you choose to lead, or does it influence how you think you lead?
Oh, I think it does, although I've had to learn over the years, and I say this because I grew up in a household with 5 brothers, so I had to pitch better than any of them.
Go, girl.
And then I went to law school, which was a pretty male-dominated experience, and I worked at Georgetown for a long time. So I always tell the story. The first day I was president of Trinity, I called a faculty meeting, and it was hot. We were in our old social hall, and the faculty was terrified. Everybody thought the place was going to close. And I stood up, and I gave what I still think might have been one of the best speeches I ever gave. It was, follow me, everybody, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and it's going to be great, and we're going to... And when I stopped, there was dead silence in the room, and then everybody got up and walked out. And I turned to the dean, who was the senior history professor then, who had been my history professor, and I said, Jean, what just happened? And she said, do not ever speak to them that way again. And I said, what do you mean? What did I do? She said, you just gave a lecture for an hour. You did not ask anybody to participate. And that was a gendered issue that I was speaking from my lawyer, sort of male-dominated household thing. I had adopted a male style when, in fact, my institution is intensely female and intensely circular in the way we communicate. Now, almost 30 years later, we have very few meetings where anybody stands up and talks at anybody. We have a lot of sitting around tables. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And I often say to colleagues, we forget how privileged we are at Trinity in this female-dominated environment where we really do have a way and a habit of relating that I think people would see as intensely gendered. Even the guys who work with her are that way too. When the rest of the world is a little more male in its style, if you will. Now, some people say there's no such thing as any of that. But one is the old-fashioned command and control, which we're seeing a resurgence of in certain quarters in this town. And other is relational. So you can say, don't call it male or female, but one is relational, one is command and control style, one is servant leadership, one is top-down leadership, however you... I had to learn all of that. I never went to leadership school or anything like that. I had to learn how to listen, how to manage, how to know what was in the bubble over the heads of the people in the room. Because I might have been saying, oh, we're going to have hamburgers for lunch today, and the bubble in the person's head was, why is she wearing green shoes? And if you don't intuit other people, you're never going to be a good leader for them. So that was a long learning experience for me.
I love that idea that you had to learn that.
Oh, yeah.
And oftentimes we don't think that. I remember teaching women's studies as a graduate student, this idea, I think women's ways of knowing was such a,
Yeah.
and the idea of thinking about how we even, what we bring into our spaces and what we've experienced tremendously influences how we choose to lead and what we have to learn in that. So this series that I'm doing this year is really about the American dream. In a lot of ways, is it at risk? Does it still exist anymore? How do we protect it? How do we adapt it and transform it? So I'm really interested in hearing from your wisdom as a university president, as a well-regarded leader, as someone who believes in speaking truth to power every time you can, someone who's still learning and growing and stretching. Does the American dream still exist? And with that, what does it mean to be an American now?
Well, my oh my, those are provocative questions. And I'll take a crack, but you've got to jump in here too. We've got to do this as sister presidents together here.
I got your back.
Because we got to be on it together. First of all, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. If I didn't have hope, I couldn't do my job. I'm an optimistic person. And I have to believe that every single student who walks through the front door every day intensely believes in their version of the American dream. And they are coming to my college, to your college, to the other places they go, because they truly believe that they can grab hold of something that will be transformative, not just for themselves, but for their children. And children play a huge role in this. And you have to have hope for your children and your children's children. That is the essence of the American dream, is that each generation can do a little better. And, you know, there's a lot of rhetoric out there that, well, you know, millennials or Gen X, or, you know, that one didn't do better than the other. You know, there may be econometrics around all of this, but you've got to have the hope that it can be better, and education is fundamentally an enterprise of hope and belief in a future that is the American dream. Now, who's America and what America? And this is where the fight is raging in this country right now. Whose version of America and whose American dream? And we either will allow all of the American dreams to be this beautiful mosaic so that everybody can define their dream in the way that suits them and their purpose, or we're going to have one American dream where everybody either stands up or sits down or kneels according to what dear leader says, and it will be a plain vanilla American dream that will exclude everybody who does not match that one idiosyncratic version. We thought that had gone out with high-stepping boots and, you know, a previous era, and here it is in our midst. I think what is so important about what's happening about this battle with the NFL and the anthem and all of that, it's not about the flag, it's not about the anthem, it's certainly not about the soldiers. It is about whether Americans will respect each other's right to express their agreement or disagreement, to express their concerns over racism and justice and police brutality, whether we agree or disagree with the methodology that Colin Kaepernick and the other players are using, or the high school students who are doing it now, whether we agree or disagree, whether we would do it ourselves or not, we respect their right to express themselves as they see fit. That is the America of the mosaic. And whether we agree or disagree with the mode of expression, we join in solidarity for justice. And you can say, well, I might stand for the national anthem because that's what I do, but I don't disrespect them, but more importantly, I hear what they're saying and I'm going to be their champion because justice is denied. You know, I saw this thing Mike Ditka
Oh, God.
said yesterday. Did you see this?
Yeah. 100 years.
100 years there's been no oppression? Okay, so that might be like the result of football injuries that he sustained, but this is the problem. We are in an era where newspeak, George Orwell wrote this, newspeak is predominant right now, and with all of our social media, it gets carried on out there everywhere. And we need to stand up, speak truth to power. How about speak truth to truth? Speak truth to falsehood.
Speak truth.
Speak truth.
Period.
Speak truth. And in speaking truth, speak to justice. It keeps coming back, in my view, to the idea of justice. And justice allows every single human being to live their best life every day according to the way they choose how to live their lives. And it's not for anybody else to dictate to anybody how to live that life. And that's where we have to believe we can do it, and that we can recreate that society that we thought we had, that existed before January 20th this year, that we have to get back.
Drop the mic, right? Let me tell you, this is why I love this woman, because of that ability to name that. You asked, you didn't need any help from me on that question, but my belief is that we have forgotten that being an American, Americanness, American identity is a verb and not a noun.
Yes.
And we have to practice it. We have to live it. We have to fight for it. We have to protect it. And being American is dirty work.
Yeah.
It's about understanding all the things you just said. But the minute that we elevate what it means to be an American to be just a noun, we have failed. We have failed tremendously.
That is
so
good.
I love you.
Love that.
And I'm so grateful that you chose to open up our series this year and be a part of this.
Well, thank you.
This has been a tremendous conversation. I'm so grateful to Pat McGuire for her time. Those of you who know the work of college presidents, and those of you who know me and know Pat, know this is hard work, it's engaging work. So to take time to choose to be here, I'm just so grateful. And I feel a real camaraderie with what we talk about and how we do this work. Let me be clear, too, as well, that this idea about the idea of the American dream and what it means to be an American is a complex one. It's not one that we sit down in an hour and a half and have all the answers. And going to a point that Steve made at the top, I am deeply committed to creating spaces and places where we grapple with these issues and to talk about them and engage them. And I challenge you all to leave this space doing that same thing over a lunch table, a dinner table, at a library, walking, engaging. This is what this work is about, to actively engage in it. And I predict that we will be having many more of these conversations within our institutions, within our community. I hope our audience will be inspired by what Trinity University has done under the leadership of Pat McGuire and the role that it plays in transforming lives each and every day and providing those unique experiences for the students who go there. I really want to thank Steve Hull again, editor and publisher, Bethesda Magazine, for sponsoring this event for us. Bethesda Magazine is a phenomenal read, and Bethesda Beat, if you don't sign up and get that every day, I really want to encourage you to do that. It's the way that I found out what's really happening in the county, and I hope that you choose to be a part of that. I'm also hopeful that you here and those of you at home will choose to be a part of our next speaker. We're going to have a dialogue on November 28th with Seth Goldman, the co-founder of Honest Tea, and we're going to do that on that day. He'll be talking about what it means to be an American in international business these days, and how ethics and transnational commerce intersect. And that will be taking place at our Rockville campus on November 28th, and I hope that I will see you there. And of course, tune in to MCTV, where you have the opportunity to see this dialogue many times again over the next month. Madam President,
thank you, Madam
so
President.
much.
It's been so
You're
great to be with you.
Oh,
My sister president.
I love it, love it, love it, love it. And thank you all for being here this
Thank you all
evening.
as well.
Please join us in the hallway, where I think we may have a cookie platter out there for us as well.
Okay, who paid
All
for
right.
those cookies? Thank you.